The first thing to do probably is to just give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the UI for Piranesi. Not entirely certain how many of you have tried the demo or already existing users of previous versions of Piranesi, but certainly if you've been users of anything from 1 to 4, you'll notice some differences in the range of tools available in version 5. But also, we're well aware of the fact that Piranesi is one of those tools that you don't use every day of the week, even if you are already a customer. So feel free to use this as a refresher as we go if you're already a Piranesi user. So Piranesi is essentially a painting application. This is a 2D image. It's not a modeler. I can't spin this around or anything like this. What we have here is an export from a SketchUp file. If you're a SketchUp user, you can already create your own ePix files, which are the source files for using Piranesi, by doing file export 2D graphic, and from the drop-down options picking Piranesi's ePix file format. And essentially, an ePix file is very similar to a TIFF file. It's a standard RGB-based image of a fixed number of pixels, which you define when you do your export. But in addition to the RGB values for each pixel, every pixel has a material definition, if one has been assigned within the modeler, and also a depth information, which allows every pixel to know relative to every other pixel within the image, whether it's foreground, background, or anything in between. That sounds a little bit complex, but I'll explain as we go. But essentially what it allows us to do is to paint a whole block of material up in one go without having to create masks, and also paint in 3D, so effectively paint with a texture that wraps around corners and things, even though it's a 2D image file. If I take you, as I say, on a quick UI tour, down the left-hand side here we have the standard tools you'd expect to find in most painting applications. There's a paintbrush, a pencil for drawing straight lines and rectangles and other vectors. There's a flood fill paint bucket icon. The painter is a dynamic brush, and we'll be using one of those during the course of the presentation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. There's a stamp for putting collections of brush strokes or logos, that kind of thing. Then the next tool is a cutout tool. The Piranesi, obviously one of its key strengths is its ability to be able to place cutouts within your image to populate it and put it into context. There's a text tool for adding 3D text into your scene as well. The multiple cutout tool is a new one for previous Piranesi users or trialists. Essentially exactly the same idea as cutout. It just allows you to put, as you'd expect, a larger number in at once, and these can be done in an ordered fashion or alternatively in a randomized configuration. And when I come to demonstrate that, I'll explain the situations in which you might use either. We have our multiple fill, which is effectively our kind of effects, our visual effects options within Piranesi. Piranesi comes with 15 of these out of the box, but you have the ability to be able to create your own, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. The filters that allow a wide range of different effects to be placed onto the image as well, such as wobbles and changing the background to being, or changing the image itself to be much darker for nighttime image styles. There's a restore brush, and I won't give you too much information about that to start with, other than to say you effectively can burn off any colours you put over the top of an illustration to return it to the restore point. I'll be using one of these brushes towards the end of the demonstration. It will be much clearer then. Find edges, probably needs no explanation whatsoever. It's fairly self-explanatory. The difference with Piranesi's Find Edges tools compared to something like Photoshop is that because we're able to use find edges on the basis of depth and also material, we can pick up the absolutely pixel perfect edges, whereas something like Photoshop might be working off the difference in the color ranges for each pixel and assuming that a large color jump would represent an edge within your image. We don't have to rely on that within Piranesi. We can do find edges by color, but it's much more accurate if you can do it on the basis of material changes or depth changes. There's a construct brush, and construct allows you to create and extend new planes within your image, such as painting in hedges if you don't already have it, and painting in brick walls and things. But predominantly, it's actually used for a retrospective application of a material. So one of the requirements with Piranesi is that within your modeler, to get the most out of Piranesi, you have already assigned materials. You don't have to have painted up those materials or used rasters or anything like that, but as long as you have named or numbered the materials used within your modeler, then Piranesi can use those that nomenclature to be able to paint up quickly. The construct tool can be used to retrospectively apply materials. So for example, if I was starting with just a simple pencil sketch on a piece of paper that I had scanned, the construct brush, effectively a bit like a magic wand tool within Photoshop, for example, would allow you to select an area within boundary edges of a line and determine that as a material. So you can retrospectively add in materials if there aren't there already. But as I say, the best thing is always to make sure that you've applied them within your model to start with. The smudge and light and just the pan tools are fairly self-explanatory, as is the zoom tool. At the bottom here, and I'm hoping that everybody can see the full extent of my screen. I should have checked first, but I'm hoping you can. There's three blue buttons are the model locks. There's a color lock as well underneath, but essentially the lock buttons are what makes Piranesi different to standard painting applications. The one I'm hovered over at the moment, as you can see from the tooltip, was the plane lock, and effectively you can say I want to paint everything that's on the same vertical plane using this, or horizontal plane using this particular lock. The orientation lock is everything that faces in a particular direction, regardless of which plane it is, as long as it points in the same direction. And a material lock. A material lock is probably the one that gets used the most. So you can say I want to only paint a particular material on which I first click. But these can actually be used in conjunction as well, so you can have combinations of these. Color lock obviously is fairly self-explanatory. It locks to a particular color to provide any action or function. So that's the main toolbar. Up here we have the contextual toolbar information. As I switch through the tools themselves, you'll see that the various options for each of those tools is changing. Over on the right-hand side here, we have some fairly static information, which is picking the colours for your brushes and things, and what opacities and blend types you're using. Down at the bottom here, we have a tree structure, and the tree, the folders themselves basically hold our brushes and styles that we're going to be using for this particular demonstration. Piranesi works best when you find a brush or a style that you like, and rather than having to recreate that each time, you store it into a folder for reuse. It's a great shortcut mechanism. For this particular demonstration, as you can see, I've got 3 folders, and you'd probably use Piranesi in exactly the same way yourselves. So you'd either have a folder for an individual project to ensure that every illustration that you produce of that project has a similar look and feel. Or alternatively, it might be for a particular customer. If you know their customer has a particular enjoyment of a particular illustration style, you might want to store those brushes for reuse on all of their projects. It could be that you just have one overarching folder that's used for the practice that has a practice-defined style that is needed to be applied to any illustrations that you generate. But in this particular instance, I know the brushes that I'm going to use, I've stored them, I have them ready in sequence, and effectively any illustration that I produce becomes a much quicker step-by-step process. And so as you find brushes and styles you like, when you store them, you're giving yourself a much shorter workflow to get to your finished illustration. So to the image itself, as I said, this is a house type actually that we downloaded from Google's 3D warehouse. We needed an American style house to take with us to a trade show in the States. We felt that presenting a British house might be a little bit too much of a leap for a lot of the people that were there. They would be horrified at the things we live in over on this side of the Atlantic. So we found a US house type that we've downloaded, and this is what we're going to paint up at this first part of the demonstration. If I take you just down to the bottom here, we have a shortcut channel view option. This is actually accessible from the view menu up at the top here with the channel options up here, but I tend to use the shortcuts down at the bottom. What we're looking at the moment with the plain white rendered export with lines and shadows, a fairly typical kind of export that people might expect to see out of SketchUp. It's very recognizable as a SketchUp model. This is the standard RGB view, and as I said, Piranesi's EPIX file stores depth information and also any material definition